Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Key Masters. I'm Sven Rajala, and today I got my little buddy from Canada over here.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan, and I lead product and customer marketing at Keyfactor.
And today we want to get into this whole agentic AI. So what is agentic AI all about, Ryan? We hear this buzzword a lot and figured we might as well cover an episode on it and get to the bottom of some of this.
Yeah, it's definitely a big buzzword out there today. It's the evolution of AI, right? We've seen generative AI, and the ability to generate responses is very prompt driven.
Mm-hmm.
I think this movement to agentic is exactly that. We're giving them agency, right? Now they can act, they can make decisions. But with that comes access to sensitive systems. And that's ideally how these can be used, right? Is accessing systems, applications of the enterprise so they can really do good work. But with that comes obvious risks. So
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot of conversation around that.
So that seems like the big security risks of where does the access stop?
Right, exactly. And the other piece too is who or what is accessing my systems. I think that's really where it begins, right? Is the identity piece, because if we don't know who or what is accessing, that's really the basis for any security is understanding what it is in the beginning. So that's kind of where the conversation is starting today.
So what do we see as the most prevalent authentication means of these new type of bots, the smart bots?
Yeah, so I also think to take a step back with AI agents, I know there's a lot of hype around it, but most of these are still in design. Some are in pilot, very few are in production. And the reason for that is the biggest barrier is trust, right? Do we actually trust these systems? I mean, think back to Terminator, all these movies that we were taught as kids never to trust the machines, right? It's just innate in us. And so when we move forward, there's an innate distrust of something that's non-human. So now these systems accessing our systems, we need to be cautious about how they do that. So exactly as you said, credentials, a lot of the conversation is, I talk to Gartner analysts, I talk to our clients, and it's, do we use service accounts? Do we use user accounts? Do we delegate from our users? There's a lot of kind of questions around that. So I think today that's kind of where people are at, is just asking the questions. They're not necessarily as a standard yet today, but if people are doing it and they are in test or pilot, they're probably using, some form of static credential or user credential to authenticate those agents.
Wow, so they're not even considering PKI yet.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're moving, right? Is how do we find a new standard for authentication that's going to work, that's going to be robust and secure, so and scalable, right? These things are operating at speed and scale, ideally when they're in production. So I think that's the big conversation: is what is the ideal credential? And I know OAuth is emerging as a core standard, right? We're using this today. We can use proven methods that we're already leveraging today and apply them to these agents. So that's where PKI can potentially play a role, and already does within the OAuth framework today, and can potentially do that in the future, as well as some other methods, right, for not just authentication, but things like mutual TLS, securing the communications between agents.
So it'd really be like about developing more token exchange service at that point where we could leverage the PKI for the agentic AI bot to come in and exchange his PKI credential for the token and then be able to authenticate out to all the service he needs to go that way and have strong authentication from the back and be able to get where he needs to go.
Right, exactly. So, as you know, OAuth, it's that method of exchanging some sort of credential for a temporary token, and that reduces the risk because that token is short lived for that moment of access. So the question is, what credential are we exchanging for that token? And in our opinion, certificates are the strongest form of credential. Using a shared ID or client ID or secret, those are static.
Seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, potentially to be exploited. I mean, we've seen plenty of exploitation there. There's also, the risk that agent will misplace that credential. Is if that agent has access to it, will it actually publish that? And people have tested that, right? Give me this credential, test and see if it's going to do that for you. And in some cases, it has. So there is a risk there of exposure. So certificates, they're a much better alternative. They're a much more robust form of authentication. They're tied back to a root of trust. We're validating that identity constantly, and they're rotated. So they're a much more strong form of credential that can be used within the OAuth framework.
So do service meshes come up in any of these conversations you've been having for like the mass scale of these? Because I imagine they're probably deployed in a container, which would then be probably protected with a service mesh, I would think, so we could have that initial bootstrapping of the certificate there to be able to federate out with down the road, yeah?
Right. Yeah. So, and I'm not the most technically, and in fact, you probably know more about service mesh than I do, but it is important to recognize the architecture, the infrastructure that these agents operate within. And like you've said, they're likely going to operate within a containerized framework. And how do we secure those different? I mean, there's even conversation about, do we sign those containers? We're already, that's best practice today, is to sign a container image,
Well,
and sure, you can
not
validate
only
that.
that, but then you want the SBOMs in there and then provenance for an
Right.
attestation. And a lot of people are running policy agents in the Kubernetes cluster now as well. It's going to be checking all those to even deploy. And if it doesn't have those, sorry, I'm not going to deploy,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
great. I love seeing it come that far.
Yeah, so we can apply the same methods that we're using today. These are another form of workload, right? They're the only thing that's unique about them is workloads are, they perform as you expect them to. But these agents, I mean, they operate at the same speed and scale as workloads, but they're incredibly unpredictable. And that's the power of them, right? That they're able to make decisions on their own. Eventually, many of the systems I think in use today, even if they are in production, are very, human in the loop oriented. But the goal is to move toward autonomous and then eventually multi-agent systems where they're collaborating and working together. So, understanding that uniqueness of these, they're not just workloads, although they can be authenticated as workloads. They do operate in their own unique ways, but we can apply the same proven methods that we're using today already through PKI. And I think the big focus with
Yeah.
service mesh tends to be the ingress egress points, not necessarily the MTLS that happens within.
Yes.
But I think both of those are equally important when it comes to AI agents as well. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big question people are asking, is how do we actually secure this within a service mesh framework?
So where should people be going to get more information about this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of standards that are emerging. I think OWASP is, I believe they're working. There's a working group that's coming out with, they have their top 10 risks. So we should see an update there. And then there's standards groups out there as well. I mean, of course, we have our own content. We just came out with a white paper that digs into securing AI agents. We have our own MCP server as well at Keyfactor. So there's information that we have out there, but there's certainly a lot of standards bodies that you can check out that are approaching this. And Cloud Security Alliance is also another one. They've kind of developed a framework around AI security, and they continue to build upon that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that's our little talk on Agentic AI. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next episode.